Hello and welcome back to the channel. For this video, I wanted to do something I haven't done in a while. Travel back in Sonic time to the 1990s and look at some old and obscure UK merch from the early days of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. So strap yourselves in while we look back at books! Oh no, boring. But stick with me, it'll be worth it. Before I begin, if you want to support this small but growing channel, please do me a solid and hit that like button. Leave a comment down below and subscribe for well-produced videos, IMO, covering all things Sonic and Sega, past, present, and future. Anyway, back to it. If you attended primary school in the UK back in the 90s, I assume you also had book fairs. This is presumably still a thing in schools today, and it's probably a thing outside of the UK too, but I don't know. I'm a grown adult from Britain. Anyway, what would basically happen was some company or other would wheel a bunch of big metal containers into the school assembly hall, flop them open and reveal one large portable bookshop. The kids would descend upon the books like ravenous word-hungry lunatics, while the parents stood there and eventually forked over the cash. The problem for me was that I didn't give a shit about reading, so when these events rolled around and the other kids were chomping at the bit for the latest book. As you can see, I can't give a single example of a popular book at the time. There was nothing there for your friendly pal, Mr. Hill Top Terebi presenter. Or so I thought. You see, the people at Big Book Company, whose name I don't recall, were one step ahead of me. They'd come prepared for disinterested thickos like me, for dotted throughout these shelves were a selection of tie-in books for many popular kids franchises at the time. And, what with it being the early to mid-90s at the time, there was unsurprisingly no shortage of books centered around the spiky blue boy. And from the moment I unexpectedly clocked a Sonic book on the shelves during my earliest memory of a book fair, this book specifically, but we'll get back to it later, I knew there was a fair chance that every book fair going forward would bring with it the possibility of new Sonic material for me to consume. Would this ignite a dormant passion deep within me for the written word? Would I discover the power of reading? Or would I more likely simply buy as many Sonic books as my pocket money, or allowance to my American viewers, would allow, simply because Sonic was on the front cover, and then just sort of half read them-ish, maybe look at the pictures, and just leave them on a shelf indefinitely after that? Spoiler alert, it was the latter. Regardless, we're going to look back at all of the UK Sonic the Hedgehog books from the 1990s today. Some of these releases may have also popped up in other territories. I don't know. By the way, in case you want to jump ahead to specific books or skip any readings or whatever, this whole video is chaptered, like a book, and you will find timestamps in the description below. Anyway, on with the video. First up we have Stay Sonic, a 1993 lore book that established the UK version of Sonic's origin story that would continue to be used for years to come in the likes of Fleetway's Sonic the Comic and future books that we'll look at later in this video. This one was published by Fantail, who also put out a number of other Sonic books, which we'll get to later on. This version of Sonic history was taken from the Sega of America Sonic Bible, and although it was quickly abandoned by US Sonic media in the likes of Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog and SatAM, the UK clearly fucking loved it, and it became our official origin story for the Hedgehog for years to come. And to be fair, it's not a bad one. The gist of the origin story in Stay Sonic is as follows. It starts with Sonic burrowing into the hidden underground laboratory of Dr. Ivo Kintoba, or Kintobor, never known how to pronounce that. He's a nice scientist on a mission to rid Mobius, that was Sonic's planet at the time, of all evil using the Chaos Emeralds and his invention, the Retro-Orbital Chaos Compressor. He basically gathered all the evil into the 6 Chaos Emeralds and was now seeking out the all-important 7th Grey Emerald to neutralize the evil. Sonic and Kintoba become pally, and Sonic uses Kintoba's special treadmill called the Kinetic Gyratosphere to increase his running speed. He eventually ends up breaking the sound barrier and hitting a top speed of 761 miles per hour, which triggers a sonic boom and turns Sonic blue for some reason. Later on, there's an accident involving the ROCC with the evil storing Chaos Emeralds, and also a rotten egg gets thrown into the mix, and this incident causes the kind, slim Dr. Kintobor to transform into the overweight and villainous Dr. Robotnik. This explosion of the ROCC is also what scatters gold rings across Mobius, and Robotnik then hides the 6 Chaos Emeralds within psychedelic warps of confusion, basically the special zones, and all of this leads to the events of Sonic the Hedgehog 1. Let's look at what else is on offer in this book. It contains stacks of information and lore on various Sonic the Hedgehog zones. For example, Mystic Cave Zone. No one has ever been able to explain the origins of the ivy-covered Mystic Cave Zone, which is lit by only flickering insect inhabitants. What is known for certain is that the area has existed almost unchanged for hundreds of years, and looks just as it did then. But how it came to exist in its present state has never been resolved by large numbers of scientists who have spent years analyzing samples and studying theories. At one point a reward was offered, and a title for a scientifically provable solution as to how it evolved. Inspired by the mystery, Kintaba invested much of his time trying to prove his own theory that the first Mobian civilization began in this region. He asked Sonic to explore the zone and used the Hedgehog's findings to propose that a group of natives had joined together there to form the first race. They were intelligent and had the means to make fire, used to create the lanterns with which they lit the gloom. Nobody believed him. However, he was convinced he was correct. Deep in his subconscious, Kintaba harbored a grudge. This was unleashed when his personality inverted. He returned to the zone, preparing it for Sonic. Robotnik took it into consideration that Sonic knew the spot well and had assumed that he'd be unprepared for the hazards that he had placed for him, such as spiked brick walls which materialized out of nowhere. He considered with typically grim irony that Sonic's disappearance would come to be as big a mystery as the zone. So clearly taking some creative liberties there. There's also loads of information on the Badniks. For example, Burrowbot. Happy underwater and on dry land, Burrowbot lives in burrows in the Labyrinth Zone, with only its spinning drill nose showing above the ground, until it leaps out and attacks. Its caterpillar treads can climb steps and make it a fearsome opponent. The best way to annoy it is to call it a sissy and knock off its baseball cap. So basically take the 90s school bully approach and you're going to get a rise out of it. Coconuts. Designed to make a monkey out of Sonic, this cheerless chimp shins up and down the palm trees of Emerald Hill Zone, lobbing fruits and nuts at passers-by. Offering it a cup of tea only makes it angrier, so Sonic waits until it's just thrown something and then takes it for a spin. A spin attack. We also get a look at the cockpit of Robotnik's Eggomatic, some Sonic 2 hints and tips, celebrity interviews, bizarrely, and more. And going back to Robotnik for a moment, his obsession with eggs is really emphasized in this book. It's something a lot of the non-game Sonic material leaned into at the time, as you'll come to learn as this video progresses. Speaking of Robotnik, let's look at his physical characteristics. Once a trim man given to a healthy organic diet, Robotnik is now disgustingly rotund, with a decidedly egg-shaped physique, a grotesquely evil face, and worst of all, a mustache. In fact, he's bad and mad, with spindly arms and legs stuck onto an egg-shaped torso. He has a major league body odor problem, which makes him smell like a rotten egg. But that's nothing compared to the noxious odors which emanate from elsewhere. It's not a good idea to point this out to him. Naturally, Robotnik is more than a little slow on his feet. In fact, he can't even see them. Running is out of the question, but then he has the Eggomatic. And we then do get a look inside the Eggomatic's cockpit, which I will put on screen now. If I had to guess with this one, I'd say the author, Mike Patterson, was given access to the US Sonic Bible and then a bit of guidance. But for anything they didn't have lore for example the history of the zones, the Badnik's personalities and so on, he was probably given free rein to go nuts with his own interpretations. And what he's pulled off here is pretty damn cool and imaginative. All in all, a fascinating piece of Sonic history. It's great that they tried to give the franchise a consistent lore in the UK for a while, even if it has since been superseded. And a lot of the stuff in here is quite bizarre, and there is stacks of fat shaming directed at Robotnik. In fact, it describes him as disgustingly obese. A product of its time. Next, let's look at the Ladybird series of books, aimed at younger fans of the Sonic franchise. And by the way, all these Ladybird books were released in 1994 as far as I can recall, with the exception of some of the follow-ups possibly coming out the following year. But obviously they were seen on store shelves for a lot longer than that. Sonic the Story. This colourful half-comic, half-regular kids book told the UK origin story of Sonic the Hedgehog mentioned previously through colourful images and, well, text obviously. Designed to bring kids up to speed on the world and lore of Sonic the Hedgehog and its characters, this Tales-narrated book tells the origins of Robotnik and Sonic, as well as introduces the reader to some of Sonic's mates. So, if the more text-heavy Stay Sonic story was too wordy for you, here's basically the same thing presented with big pictures and the occasional speech bubble. It's a fine, kid-friendly, well-presented introduction to the defunct British lore of Sonic the Hedgehog. Ladybird released 2 more Sonic storybooks like this, which were both clearly aimed at younger Sonic fans. First off, there was The Invisible Robotnik. This pointless story set in the Hill Top Zone, fuck yeah, sees Robotnik turn himself invisible in one of his more bizarre schemes. Presumably, this was in hopes of giving himself the competitive edge over Sonic, but all that actually happens is Robotnik gets repeatedly injured, either self-inflicted or otherwise, in a series of slapstick, invisibility-based blunders. He eventually decides the whole scheme was a shit idea from the get-go, before making himself visible again and destroying the machine that caused the whole mess. A completely pointless series of events and not the smartest scheme from a man with an IQ of 300. Next up we have Robotnik's Oil. In this story, Robotnik discovers oil beneath the aquatic ruin zone, and naturally wants it for himself. So he gets straight to work setting up an oil rig. Sonic is worried about the environmental effects of this, but Robotnik couldn't care less. He literally says so in more or less those words. Fortunately, using his super speed, Sonic is able to quickly adjust the oil rig settings in such haste that Robotnik can't even tell what he's done. Until it's too late. He activates the rig and finds that instead of spewing out black gold, he is doused with cold water. Robotnik throws in the towel, dismantles the rig, and goes home cold, wet, and defeated. That's it for the narrative-based Ladybird Sonic books. I had them all as a kid, and got some enjoyment out of Sonic the Story, but I found the other 2 to be too simple and childish for my sophisticated Sonic tastes. And that was back when I was 9. Returning to them all these years later after being spoiled by the likes of Breaking Bad, Twin Peaks The Return, and True Detective, I think that any small appreciation I may have had for the narrative back then has diminished even further with time. I can appreciate that once again they are nicely presented and colourful with game-accurate artwork, which is nice.
Even if they did use the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog Robotnik design here, which I've ranted about in the past.
But there is very little worthwhile content here. To the dumpster of history with you, children's books! Now let's look at the Sonic the Hedgehog Adventure Gamebook series. Not these adventure gamebooks, although we will get to these, but a completely unrelated series of adventure gamebooks. These were 4 full-colour, hand-drawn books that see the reader, or player, progress through a series of challenges, such as finding items, Where's Wally or Waldo style, completing mazes, and some number-based tasks, among stacks of other stuff. Some pages even turned into full-on dice-rolling tabletop board games. The page you went to next would be determined by how you did in these challenges, or occasionally was a choice left up to the player. Books 1 and 2 featured the zones and loose plot from Sonic 2, whereas books 3 and 4 were set in the zones of Sonic 3 but featured an original plot which involved the colour getting sucked out of the world. Let's look at some examples of these books. This page, complete with a blue-armed Sonic, depicts Sky Chase Zone. Here's the objective. Use a coin as a counter and a dice to tell you how many squares to move at each turn. When you get to the end, choose an exit route. Here's another example, this time set in the Mystic Cave Zone, and this one is basically snakes and ladders. Among all these balloon spitters, as they call them here, there are 2 pairs that are the same. I don't have the patience to even attempt it. And here's a nice easy one that's more my speed. Simply find 5 monitors and 8 energy rings, as the book calls them. This I can be asked to do. Here's one set in Marble Garden Zone where you've got to put together this sign and figure out what it used to say. It recommends using tracing paper to do this, but I reckon you could figure it out without it. Here's an interesting one that's good to fuel an argument. Splashdown. Robotnik hasn't reached this part of Hydro Space City Zone yet. Hydro City, not Hydrocity. But Sonic's pals have heard he's on his way and have gone overboard in panic. Help Sonic find all his friends before the badniks get here and burst their bubbles. Knuckles has tried to confuse Sonic by painting fake tails all over the place. Can you spot the fakes and help the blue bomber find his real friend? Here's another one that's more my speed too. a simple chemical plant zone maze. The chemical plant zone helps Sonic find a path through the maze. There are 2 ways out. If you've got functioning eyes, you're probably aware that these look great. Wonderfully illustrated full-color images, complete with game-accurate zones and enemies. Save for the odd incorrect coloring here and there. This alongside a variety of challenges throughout with multiple pathways as you progress through the book. I really appreciate the effort that was put into these. As a Sonic fan in the 1990s, you couldn't go far wrong with the Ladybird Adventure Gamebook series. Onto the Sonic puzzle books next then. Ladybird released 2 of these, and they're not too dissimilar to the Adventure Gamebooks previously discussed. They're based around the events of Sonic 2 and see the player solving a variety of puzzles and earning rings based on their performance. Let's have a look at some examples of what you'll find in these books. Let's see what Sonic has to say here. Quickly, guide us to the control room and out again so that we can stop this awesome pollution from spreading. Awesome pollution? Be careful. Once you pass along a path, it becomes contaminated, so you can't turn back. So as you progress through the maze, there are a number of questions. How many eyes does a Cyclops have? How many sides does a cube have? Can an elephant jump? Yes or no? I don't know. No, I guess? Are tongue prints as unique as fingerprints? I'd imagine not. I'd imagine they just make a big smudge. Then you get some of these puzzles like this one here that involves you deciphering codes to work out a message. I can't be asked to do it right now, but I'll leave it on screen if you want to, and if you do, please leave what it says in the comments below. In addition to Sonic questions, you also get math questions and general knowledge questions, and truth be told, with some of these I could probably guess, but I don't actually know the answers. So this one's quite a lot like the Adventure Gamebooks, but I would say the difficulty is ramped up a little higher here. There's some mathematics questions, there's some code deciphering, some, I guess, primary or elementary school general knowledge questions. It's not all Sonic stuff. So if you're a kid going into this one, you had to be prepared for adding up some Roman numerals and answering some questions about the wingspan of different birds and comparing kilometers per hour to miles per hour. But not the fox. You'll need more than just an extensive knowledge of Sonic the Hedgehog to get through this one. But back in the day, if you were a parent and you wanted your kid to be quiet for a couple of hours, these were probably a great solution that would probably teach them a thing or two as well. Overall, once again, they're nicely illustrated books that would present a nice challenge to any kids who are into this sort of thing. So what if you were looking for something easier? Something more visual? Something with almost no words at all? Thankfully, the good people at Ladybird provided just that with these 2 books. Where's Sonic? And its follow-up, Where's Sonic Now? Inspired by, if you're feeling generous, or rather, blatantly copying, if you're being more realistic, the wildly successful Where's Wally / Where's Waldo books, these large, full-color publications depict various zones from Sonic 2 in the first book and Sonic 3 in the follow-up. And a side note here that what actually surprised me about the second book was that the 2-player competition zones are included here. Azure Lake, Chrome Gadget, and Endless Mine all get represented in this book. Each page is also cluttered to fuck with badniks and other characters and items from the Sonic series, which Sonic tasks you to seek out during his briefing in the opening pages. I loved these as a kid. I was already into the Where's Wally books, so taking that exact concept and throwing Sonic stuff in instead, it was a surefire hit for me. Nice full-color illustrations once again, and a fun challenge. I really enjoyed these. So, the Where's Sonic books were a step down in difficulty from the puzzle books, but what if you just wanted to relax and scanning pages with your tired eyes was still too much work for you? Well, how's this for a chill as fuck way to spend your time? The Sonic Coloring Poster Book. Going off memory and images I found on eBay as I don't seem to have my copy anymore, this coloring book was basically one large pull-out poster which was divided into different sections, each depicting a different zone from Sonic 2 with the Sonic the Hedgehog logo in the center. The reverse of the poster was full color and included quizzes as well as information on the Sonic the Hedgehog zones and characters. There's not a huge lot to say about this coloring book X poster, other than that it's nicely presented and I like the artwork. They could have totally half-arsed it and released a book of traced, colorless, pre-existing official art for the kids to color in, but no, they went all out here. If I do still have my copy somewhere, I know I colored the F out of it. I vividly remember doing it to this day. I really liked this as a kid. Okay, so we're on to the last of the Ladybird books now, as far as I can recall anyway, and I've saved the absolute shittest one until now. It's the Sonic the Hedgehog joke book. A ridiculously shaped, long, thin book that was too tall to fit on any bookshelf, and oddly narrow too. In fact, the wacky shape of this book is perhaps the closest thing to a joke in this entire package. The content within these pages offers absolutely nothing of value to the reader. It's just a collection of the crappiest Christmas cracker quality gags you could possibly imagine. Occasionally, the gags are tenuously linked to Sonic the Hedgehog's world in some way, and other times not. This is just a collection of shit knock-knock jokes and other naff puns, many of which were based on eggs because... Robotnik. Let's have a look at the caliber of jokes on offer here. Knock knock. Who's there? Caterkiller. Caterkiller who? Caterkiller mouse. Knock knock. Who's there? Burrowbot. Burrowbot who? Burrow bottle of vinegar makes chips taste even better. I mean, it's barely anything, is it? Take this magic pill and you won't get wet when you go out. How can you be sure? It isn't raining. If two's company and three's a crowd, what's 4 and 5? 9. Here's Knuckles receiving treatment from a penguinator. When will my Mobian measles be better? I don't know. I don't make rash promises. I didn't know they were qualified doctors. And here's one that's apt. Why is an unsharpened pencil like a bad joke? It has no point. Just like this entire book. What did Tails say when he was escaping from Robotnik? Got to fly? What illness would Tails get? Flu. I mean, that's like the peak joke in this book. That's as good as it gets. I know this is a kid's book, but even as a child I didn't understand the point of releasing this. To give it some credit though, once again the illustrations are nice. And I guess... No, that's it, that's all I've got. Overall, this is a massive waste of time and money, but obviously I bought it anyway because... Sonic. Okay, let's get into some arguably cooler shit now with this series of 4 Sonic novels. Sonic the Hedgehog in Robotnik's Laboratory, Sonic the Hedgehog in the 4th Dimension, Sonic and the Silicon Warriors, and Sonic the Hedgehog in Castle Robotnik were a series of 4 books, apparently rather impressively churned out by a single author in just 4 months. And Martin Adams isn't actually his name, by the way. They featured Sonic, Tails, and a cast of their early mates who would go on to appear in some other, mostly UK Sonic media around that time, including Johnny Lightfoot, Rabbit, Sally Acorn, Squirrel, not the SatAM one, and Joe Sushi, Walrus, alongside Robotnik, a lot of his badniks, and numerous original characters. Let's take a look at the blurbs and synopsis for each one, and maybe then we'll dive a little deeper with a couple of readings. Sonic the Hedgehog in Robotnik's Laboratory. In this first book, which again follows the Kintuba origin story seen in all the books we've covered so far, Sonic and Tails return home from a trip to find all their friends have gone missing. Yo dudes, where did everybody go? Why can't Sonic and Tails find their friends? It's not long before the spiky sprinter realizes that they are being held in the laboratory of Dr. Ivo Robotnik, the maddest, baddest man in the whole of Mobius. Can Sonic rescue his friends in time? Or will the traps and mazes of Robotnik's laboratory prove too much even for this way cool hedgehog to deal with? Next was a time travel story called Sonic the Hedgehog in the 4th Dimension. As part of his latest plan to rule Mobius, the dastardly Dr. Robotnik is sending his robots back through time to change history. Sonic the Hedgehog, guardian of Mobius, hero to all, and all-round cool dude, intends to stop him. Hopping onto one of Robotnik's time machines, he zooms into the past, and that's where his troubles really begin. The 3rd book was Sonic and the Silicon Warriors. This one tells the story of Sonic's pal getting sucked into computers. The blurb reads, Sonic's pal, even that feisty fox Tails, have been sucked inside computers and infected with a disintegrator virus. Yes, that egg-crazy weirdo Dr. Robotnik is up to his old tricks again. And when Sonic speeds to the rescue, he comes face to face with the most ultra-mean of badniks from his favorite computer games. And finally we have Sonic the Hedgehog in Castle Robotnik. It's the Franken-Sonic monster. In this fourth book in the series, Dr. Robotnik plots to defeat that pesky hedgehog once and for all by building a bought-together version of Sonic. Werewolves, vampires, and mummies lie in wait for Sonic and his sidekick Tails as they venture into Robotnik's mountaintop castle for a cataclysmic confrontation. Let's talk about them some more. These books were clearly written when the Sonic universe was in its infancy and the author was presumably given free rein to interpret the series and characters as he wished. Although they're depicted as heroes, early on in the series, I'm looking at the first book here, Sonic and Tails are also written as impatient, stupid, and slobbish. The pair overindulge in junk food constantly, are very messy, and right out of the gate are planning a mean-spirited prank on their friend, Porker Lewis. Okay, now that we've satisfied our truly awesome hunger with that little snackette, I vote we go and find our friends and party on with some holiday stories. Besides, I wanted to see if Porker got that exploding luminous custard bomb we sent him. Well, why don't we wait till it's dark and see if we can see him glowing? Tails sniggered. Sonic laughed. Nah, I can't wait. Let's go over now. Tails is depicted as being especially dim-witted, with Sonic calling him stupid at times and generally taking the piss out of him. Let's have a look at an example of this dim-wittedness. Yo, what's up? Said the fox, panting slightly after his long run. Hey, I found these in the Aqua Lake zone. He opened his paw to display 9 gold rings. How many did you get? Just 5, replied Sonic, handing them over. I must have found almost every single one by now, in the zones I patrol anyway. There can't be many left for us to find. How many have we got now? Tails asked. Come on, dude, Sonic sighed. We've got 870 so far. Add 5 and 9 to that. What do you get? 1,000,000? The fox asked hopefully. Sonic sighed again. One day he would have to check out his suspicion that if he looked up lovable idiot in the dictionary, he would find a picture of Tails. The fox was a good friend and a good runner. Well, okay, he was an excellent runner, almost as good as Sonic himself. But he was younger than the Hedgehog, and his lack of experience and knowledge did mean that sometimes he let Sonic do all the thinking. Early on in this series, Sonic is exactly the kind of arsehole you'd want to avoid in real life. He is obnoxious, although not constantly. He's still the hero, but also a twat. Disclaimer, I didn't have time to reread all these books for this video, so maybe he grows and changes as the series progresses. In fact, skimming through the later books in this series, he does seem to be considerably less of a bellend, but I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you read these and if he becomes more likable as the series progresses. Hey Sonic, Tails gasped. Someone spelt out the word help in fridge magnet letters on the door. I wonder what that means. Sonic? Sonic was sniffing the air. His spines were beginning to bristle with a familiar tingling sensation. Can you smell something, little dude? Tails sneezed. Like fish? No, stupid. Concentrate. Tails sniffed frantically. Oh, yuck. Awful. It smells like...
Yeah, totally gross.
And it smells like rotten eggs. Now we both know what that means. The way Sonic and Tails speak is quite bizarre too. The 90s American slang, that I don't think any real human has ever spoken like, sounds, at first glance, like their personalities are lifted straight from Bill and Ted. But sprinkled throughout their dialogue is jarring British expressions. So yeah, Sonic in these books, he's a hero sure, but also a messy, junk food loving prankster who really enjoys video games, particularly the Game Gear. But what about Robotnik? How does he compare to his game counterpart? Robotnik is portrayed as a maniacal, arrogant genius who seems to genuinely get a kick out of causing pain and suffering, with an obsession for routine and organization. He's painted as being a pretty gross individual at times. His favourite food is apparently raw eggs and hot sauce, which is described as still dripping from his mouth and over his lab coat in one scene. It almost sounds like Danny DeVito's Penguin was an influence on the character at times, visually anyway. He laughs a lot. Seriously, those H and A keys on the keyboard must have gotten a lot of action when writing this book. And he also references eggs wherever he can through wordplay and shitty puns. In fact, his lab assistant in Robotnik's laboratory, for example, is named Egor, a play on Igor, no doubt. Just for fun, here's his introduction in the second book, which I thought was quite descriptive and well written. It was a dark and stormy night. Neither moon nor stars penetrated the thick clouds that wallpapered the sky and poured raindrops the size of gobstoppers down to splatter solidly against the hard and cracked ground, parched and thirsty after a long hot summer. The air was cold but fresh, filled with the sound of the rain as it tore through leaves and grass, splashed on rocks and stones, dripped from branches and gurgled as it ran into new streams, seeking out the lowest parts of the ground into which to make puddles and pools. Let's face it, it was not a night when anyone sensible or sane would want to be anywhere outside the warm comfort of their homes. Though through the tempest skipped a single figure, splashing from puddle to puddle. From time to time, a ragged stroke of lightning pierced the sky above, throwing a light across the heavens, making the clouds look like a boiling ocean of grey-black mud and casting long, fat shadows around the figure on the ground. His clothes, a red shirt and black trousers, were damp and slick from the pelting rainwater, and clung to his bulbous body. The shirt barely covered his fat egg-like torso and stomach, while the trousers flapped damply around his thin legs. Rain splashed onto his bald head, running down his nose and into his soaked orange moustache. Over the rumble of thunder, his voice boomed and roared.
Ha 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 ha!
He boomed.
Ha ha ha!
What a beautiful night for tyranny and villainy. At last I, Dr. Ivo Robotnik, can test my final, ultimate and greatest plan without being observed and stopped by that prickled blue pest and his idiot companion. Ha! And if it works, Planet Mobius will finally be mine, and I shall be the emperor of everything. Mad, they called me. Mad. Mad.
Ha 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 ha!
Throughout the course of the adventures, Sonic and Tails run into countless zany characters, both friend and foe. Although at times the book is set in locations from the games, because of these bizarre encounters, the books take on almost an Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog feel at times, only darker. Overall, despite Sonic's characterization, I find these books to be pretty interesting. They're children's novels, sure, but they're pretty well written for what they are and make for quite a fascinating piece of Sonic history. A blue hedgehog-shaped time capsule of early 90s pop culture, from the way the characters speak to some of the references made throughout the series. There's a lot to unpack here, with almost 800 pages of Sonic stories to pick through. But as I said earlier, if anyone would enjoy a deeper dive into these, just let me know in the comments. If there's sufficient interest, I'll get on it. Moving on, and next we have my personal favourites from back in the day. The Sonic Adventure Gamebook series, from Fantail, the same people who made Stay Sonic. These are the, I guess, novel-style gamebooks, as opposed to the full-colour ones we talked about earlier. They were released earlier than many of the books on this list, hence this being the first Sonic book I ever owned, but I held them back because I wanted to end strong on this video. This series of 6 choose-your-own-adventure books sees you start out by assigning points to Sonic's different attributes, which will affect the player's progression throughout the story. The same pages are also used to keep track of items and lives that Sonic and Tails acquire on their quest. You can also use a dice, or die, to roll when in combat or other situations. It's classic choose-your-own-adventure stuff here. If you want Sonic to do blank, turn to page blank. If you think he should blank instead, turn to page blank. Like the previous novels, these feature locations and characters from the game, but dialogue-wise, they've aged a lot better. Sure, they still feature the occasional 90s slang now and again, but Sonic comes across as a much nicer fella in these. What also helps these books' interpretations feel closer to the tone of the games and the Sonic and Tails we know today is that the characters in these books rarely say anything. It's mostly descriptions of what's happening and possible actions Sonic can take, and their consequences. So I guess you can just make Sonic as nice or as twattish as you like, within reason. For example, choosing to help a friend or run away. Also, like these novels, these books feature new original characters and locations too. But unlike the novels, they also include illustrations throughout. A welcome addition, and I guess a smart move, as the book doesn't need to spend long with written descriptions of some areas and locations, which I guess could slow down the action and game element of these books. Speaking of the illustrations, by the way, some of these earlier ones feature the most bizarre visual depictions of Robotnik I've ever seen. Look at this! Part Milton Knight design, part classic Japanese Eggman design. It's so strange. Monstrous in some ways. By the end of book 6 though, he looks just like the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog Robotnik that appeared in almost all Sonic media at the time. Oh, and while we're on the subject of Robotnik, this series once again leans into the whole egg thing a lot. He is again actually described as stinking of eggs, which I think sounds fucking disgusting. Let's go through the synopsis of each of them. Metal City Mayhem. Mobius is under threat from the deranged Robotnik. The demented inventor is busy on a master plan building mega robots. Only you and Sonic can stop him. Using your skill, speed and agility, you can help Sonic save the day, but think fast and move quickly. Sonic doesn't hang about and there's no time to waste. The future of Mobius depends on you. Zone Rangers. All zones on Nightmare Alert. Robotnik is turning all the zones into a living nightmare of pollution and destruction. His Mobius mega trash plan can only be stopped by Sonic, Tails and you. You have to use all your speed, skill and wits to help Sonic save the day. But time is of the essence, as Mobius is decaying with every second. Are you ready for the challenge? Sonic vs. Sonic. What's wrong with Sonic? The Green Hill Zone is under attack from a new enemy. Reports come in of a fast-moving blue creature bashing everything in sight. Surely this can't be Sonic. Or has Robotnik cooked up another monstrous plan to crack the Blue Wonder? It's up to you to find out. Use your speed, skill and agility in this part story, part game adventure. But think fast and move quickly. Only the best can keep up with Sonic. The Zone Zapper. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's Robotnik. It's not unusual for Robotnik to go around messing up the Green Hill Zone. This time, however, he's built a brand new machine, which turns everything good into bad, even Tails. Sonic faces the fight of his life with his best friends. Will they survive, and will he? Think fast and act quickly. Sonic's going to need all the help he can get. Theme Park Panic. A roller coaster to mayhem. An amazing new theme park has opened on Mobius, but for Sonic and his pals, it turns out to have more than the usual thrills and spills, thanks to the devious mind of Robotnik. The crazed inventor plans to wipe out all the zones on Mobius, and this time he's determined to succeed. Only you and Sonic stand in his way. Are you ready to accept the challenge? If you are, get ready for the ride of a lifetime. And finally, Adventure Gamebook 6, Storm in Sonic. Storm clouds over Mobius. Sonic and his pals have never seen anything like it. All the zones are being affected by a mysterious weather egg, creating climate chaos wherever it goes. Only you and Sonic can save Mobius from a weather wipeout. Use your skill, luck and stamina to help Sonic in this amazing adventure gamebook. Overall, I think these have aged pretty well, and if you liked the choose your own adventure format and Sonic the Hedgehog, then you can't go far wrong. These were by far my favourite of the Sonic books as a kid, and I'm still finding some enjoyment in them revisiting them for this video. Okay, we're nearing the end now. Outside of the books mentioned, we had some comic-based books, including Beats the Badniks and Spin Attack. These two collected the main Sonic stories from Fleetway's Sonic the Comic, issues 1 to 4 and 5 to 8 respectively. And then they stopped there. I guess they didn't sell. There were also 2 yearbooks, which were basically annuals, which featured standalone comic strips independent from STC that told one-off stories set within the Sonic video game universe. The first book had a Robotnik fairly accurate to his video game counterpart, albeit with a different and unique suit. But by the following year, he had succumbed to the Milton Knight Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog design used in most non-game Sonic media in the UK at the time. Although looking accurate to the games with familiar locations and enemies, the stories themselves were quite slapstick in their nature, ending with Robotnik getting covered with lava, run over, caked in glue, and so on. In addition to the comic strips, they included additional content such as an interview with Sonic the Hedgehog and a week from Sonic the Hedgehog's diary, as well as game reviews and other bits and pieces. A solid set of standalone Sonic stories for kids back in the day. SSSSS. Anyway, lastly, in this I've run out of steam and these aren't particularly interesting section, there were some tie-in strategy guides. For example, this one, based on Sonic 2, and this one, based on Sonic 3. Is there really much to be said on these? Perhaps, but I never owned them, so I'm in no position to comment. But let me know in the comments if you did have them, and if there was anything special in there that I've missed. And with that, that's everything. Every UK Sonic released book I can recall from the 1990s. Most were pretty interesting in my opinion. I'd say the weakest of the bunch is that worthless Sonic joke book, and the best of the adventure game books, but most were pretty enjoyable to varying degrees back in the day. I'm well aware that the Sonic books do not stop in the 1990s, and there have been many published since that I haven't seen before, outside of on the internet. Unfortunately, it seems there are more Sonic joke books, and also Where's Wally Waldo ripoffs too, so maybe I'll cover them in future. But for now, I'll throw it over to you. Did you read any of these back in the day? Did you like any of them? Did you hate any of them? Maybe you're learning about them for the first time, or maybe they are treasured childhood memories. Whatever the case, let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button, and share the video with anyone you think might be interested in it. And of course, if you're new here, please subscribe for frequent, evergreen Sonic the Hedgehog and Sega videos. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.